She told me, "Don't call me Mrs.," but every glance, every touch, whispered something else entirely. The first time I saw her, I didn't know that a simple hallway encounter would unravel the careful rhythm of my days. I was carrying a stack of mail, fumbling slightly as a stray envelope slipped from the pile. She appeared around the corner, her presence effortless yet magnetic, like sunlight spilling into a dim room. She wore a tailored blouse and jeans that somehow balanced elegance and ease, and her hair was pulled back in a loose knot, strands soft around her face. The faint scent of her perfume, a warm, almost nostalgic vanilla, lingered in the air, embedding itself in my memory. When I addressed her, instinctively polite, I said, "Good morning, Mrs. Lawson." Her eyes, a deep, thoughtful brown, flicked up with a glimmer of amusement and something sharper, independence, awareness, confidence. "Don't call me Mrs.," she said, voice smooth but firm, her tone playful yet commanding attention. It was a correction, yes, but not unkind, more like a boundary wrapped in intrigue. I blinked, slightly startled, feeling a jolt of curiosity ripple through me. There was something about the way she stood, relaxed, yet aware of every detail around her, that made the ordinary hallway feel suddenly charged. I noticed the small things, the way her fingers lightly adjusted the edge of her scarf, the faint creases at the corner of her eyes when she smiled, the measured way she moved as if she were in no hurry but perfectly in control. Even the way she looked at me, not directly, but not dismissively either, suggested she was assessing, measuring, and perhaps teasing, all in the same glance. There was a brief silence as we both lingered, the faint hum of the apartment building's air conditioning around us. My pulse quickened at the small, human intimacy of proximity, the way the warmth of her presence seemed to brush against me like a soft current. I realized I was studying her more than I should, yet I couldn't help it. Something in her commanded attention, not through demand, but through a quiet gravity I couldn't resist. Before I could recover my composure, she smiled again, just a tilt of the lips this time, and turned away with a fluid grace that left me staring at the hallway she had just vacated. And in that moment, I knew, I had stumbled into a rhythm I wasn't ready for, a slow, tantalizing pull towards someone who would challenge my understanding of boundaries, attraction, and restraint. Even walking away, the echo of her words, "Don't call me Mrs.," lingered like a secret waiting to be discovered, and I realized I would spend the next few days replaying that brief encounter, wondering how a single sentence, spoken so casually, could unsettle me so completely. After that first encounter, I found myself noticing her everywhere, not in a stalkerish way, but as if the universe had subtly nudged me into paying attention. The mailbox became our first unofficial meeting spot. Each day, I'd arrive just slightly earlier than usual, wondering if she would be there, feeling a strange mix of anticipation and guilt. One afternoon, she appeared as if conjured by timing itself. I was fumbling with a misdelivered package, a stack of envelopes teetering in my arms, and she stepped forward, her presence grounding in the chaos. "Let me," she offered, her voice calm, carrying that same quiet authority from before. Our fingers brushed for the briefest second as she handed me the package. A spark, unspoken and electric, traveled through that fleeting contact. It was nothing more than touch, yet it lingered, like an echo you can't shake off. I caught myself observing the little things again, the curve of her shoulders as she shifted weight, the faint laugh lines that softened when she smiled, the way her eyes seemed to carry a story I wanted to read but wasn't allowed to. She moved with confidence, yet there was an undercurrent of vulnerability in the way she leaned slightly toward me, perhaps seeking human connection as much as offering it. Every exchange, no matter how mundane, seemed to stretch in my mind long after it ended. I found myself analyzing her pauses, the cadence of her words, the way she tilted her head when listening. Her presence was magnetic, but the rules of our world, her marriage, the age gap, the societal boundaries, pressed against my chest like an invisible weight. I wanted to cross that line, yet I held back, captivated by both desire and respect. During one particularly quiet moment, I asked a trivial question about a neighbor's delivery schedule. She laughed softly, that sound warm and unexpectedly intimate. My stomach tightened at the way her gaze lingered just a fraction too long on mine, and for a second, I wondered if she noticed the way I noticed her. Walking away, I felt the tug of internal conflict. I was drawn to her, undeniably, but I was painfully aware of the line between fascination and impropriety. Every glance, every accidental touch, every shared smile became a battle between my curiosity and my conscience. I couldn't stop thinking about her, yet I had no right to. And maybe that was part of the thrill, the tension of the forbidden, the magnetic pull towards someone so brilliantly alive yet so just out of reach. By the time I reached my apartment, I realized the hallway, the mailbox, even the shared building and trance had transformed into arenas of quiet tension, places where every word, every movement, carried weight. I knew that whatever was beginning between us, it would demand patience, restraint, and careful attention. And somehow, that made it all the more intoxicating. It happened almost by accident. A Sunday afternoon, warm light spilling across the small neighborhood park, found us sitting side by side on a weathered bench. I had gone to collect my thoughts after a long week, and she had chosen the same spot, book in hand. Neither of us spoke at first, the silence stretching comfortably, filled only with distant birdsong and the gentle rustle of leaves. But there was something about sitting near her, even without words, that made the world feel quieter, slower, somehow more intimate. The conversation started innocuously, a comment about the weather, and then she began to share something more personal, a glimpse into her life beyond the perfectly curated facade she maintained for the world. She spoke of the exhaustion of her days, the little compromises she made in her marriage, and the loneliness that sometimes seeped into quiet evenings. Her voice carried vulnerability, softening the confident poise she normally wore like armor. I listened, truly listened, feeling a pull to be present for her in a way I rarely allowed myself with anyone. My hand brushed against hers when I handed her a tissue for a stray tear, the contact fleeting but charged, and I felt the warmth of her skin linger in my mind long after. Her glance flicked up at me, hesitant, searching, as if asking permission to trust me further. There was a moment, brief, suspended, when our knees brushed, just lightly, under the bench. Neither of us moved away. Instead, it became a quiet acknowledgement of proximity, a small surrender to the magnetic pull between us. She laughed softly at something I said, and I noticed the way her eyes crinkled at the corners, the subtle rise and fall of her chest, the gentle tilt of her head toward me. I wanted to reach out, to hold her hand, to offer reassurance and connection, but I restrained myself, savoring the tension instead. For the first time, I allowed myself to wonder what it would be like to be truly close to her, emotionally, not physically. To share the quiet, unguarded spaces where no one else could enter. And yet, even as my heart pulled me forward, I felt the weight of propriety pressing back. She was married, our age difference made the world blink in disapproval before we could even speak. But in that park, on that bench, none of it mattered. There was only the gravity of our shared moment, the unspoken understanding that we were finding something rare and fragile, genuine connection. By the time we stood to leave, I was acutely aware of her lingering gaze as she tucked a loose strand of hair behind her ear. I felt a pang of longing mixed with gratitude. Something had shifted between us, a bridge of trust, vulnerability, and quiet tension that made the ordinary extraordinary. And for the first time, I realized that this slow, careful intimacy could be more intoxicating than any impulsive romance. The days that followed our quiet park encounter felt charged in subtle, almost imperceptible ways. Hallway meetings, casual nods in the lobby, and brief exchanges by the mailbox now carried a current I couldn't ignore. There was a playful rhythm developing between us, a dance of words and glances that seemed designed to test boundaries without crossing them. One afternoon, I leaned against the counter of the small local coffee shop, pretending to scroll through my phone when I noticed her entering. She caught my eye immediately, her presence commanding yet effortless. Her blouse, soft against the sunlight streaming through the windows, hinted at elegance without trying, and the faint scent of her perfume, a gentle mix of lavender and warmth, drifted toward me. She smiled knowingly, as if aware of the effect she had on me, and my chest tightened in a way I couldn't fully explain. "You know," I said lightly, trying to mask my nervous excitement, "I still haven't figured out what to call you." "Mrs. Fields," wrong. She raised an eyebrow, tilting her head ever so slightly, a playful challenge in her eyes. Then what do you suggest? She replied, her tone teasing, the corners of her lips curving in that subtle, confident smile that had become unforgettable. As we talked, small, accidental touches became moments I savored. Her hand brushed mine briefly as she reached for her cup, a fleeting contact that left a warmth lingering along my skin. When she leaned closer to show me a photo on her phone, I caught the faint scent of her hair, a mix of honey and sunlight, and felt a subtle flutter in my chest. It was intoxicating, this closeness, yet carefully contained, as if both of us were testing the edges of propriety without daring to step over them. Even the way she laughed had taken on new weight. It was soft and intimate, carrying a warmth that seemed directed just at me. Her eyes crinkled slightly at the corners, and the faint tilt of her head made my heart tighten. I found myself noticing every small gesture, the way she tucked her hair behind her ear, the subtle shift in posture when she grew animated, the gentle lift of her chin when she wanted to emphasize a point. Each movement seemed designed to draw me in without a word of confession. By the time we left the coffee shop, the air between us was thick with unspoken tension. Every glance over the shoulder, every fleeting touch of hands as we parted, was a promise of the connection growing steadily between us. The world outside could remain ordinary, but in these shared moments, we had created a private rhythm, a dance of flirtation and subtle intimacy, charged with desire and tempered by awareness. It was thrilling and dangerous in equal measure, and I knew that the slow burn we had started was far from over. Every meeting, every accidental brush, was a step closer to something neither of us could yet define but both secretly craved. By this point, every interaction with her felt like walking a tightrope. The initial curiosity and playful tension had deepened into something heavier, more consuming. I found myself replaying our conversations, our accidental touches, and the brief moments when our eyes lingered on one another. Each memory carried a mix of warmth and a subtle ache, a pull I couldn't ignore yet didn't dare fully embrace. It was a quiet evening when the full weight of the conflict settled in. I spotted her across the lobby, a book in hand, her posture relaxed yet radiating the same quiet confidence that had captivated me from the start. My chest tightened, a familiar tension settling in as our eyes met. For a fraction of a second, the world seemed to shrink to the space between us, and then reality intruded. She was married, and I was decades younger, standing on the outside of a life I could admire but not claim. We exchanged polite words, the casual facade of neighborly conversation. But beneath it, the air was thick with the unspoken. Every smile she offered, every subtle brush of her hand as she adjusted her sleeve, set my mind racing. I wanted to reach for her, to bridge the space between us, but restraint pressed down on me like gravity. The pull toward her was irresistible, yet the lines of propriety and morality were painfully clear. I noticed the way she paused mid-step, glancing back at me as if contemplating whether to linger. That hesitation mirrored my own, a reflection of the internal battle raging quietly in both of us. It was a dance of restraint, a careful give and take of proximity and distance, desire and respect. I longed to confess the intensity of my feelings, to let her know how profoundly she had captured my attention, but I also feared shattering the delicate balance we had created. Even mundane moments became charged with emotion. Walking past her apartment door, I lingered near the threshold, catching a glimpse of her through the window. Her gaze met mine briefly, loaded with an unspoken acknowledgement that we were teetering on the edge of something forbidden, yet neither willing to step fully over. My heart ached with the tension, a delicious and painful reminder of the stakes at hand. By the time I retreated to my apartment, I was exhausted by the weight of unspoken feelings. I craved her presence and feared it at the same time, aware that each encounter brought me closer to the precipice of something neither of us could control. The slow burn between us was no longer playful, it had grown into a quiet, persistent fire, one that demanded patience, reflection, and careful navigation. And yet, despite the hesitation, I knew that letting go was impossible. She had already claimed a part of my heart, leaving me suspended in a state of longing, uncertainty, and hope. It was an ordinary evening that turned extraordinary with a sudden downpour. I had been walking home from the grocery store when the rain began, light at first, then heavier, drumming against the pavement in steady rhythms. I ducked under the building's awning, only to find her already there, book in hand and hair dampened by stray droplets. Her presence, as always, seemed to pull the world into focus, making the rain around us feel like a private curtain drawn against ordinary life. She smiled at me, a quiet acknowledgement of shared circumstance, and gestured toward the bench beneath the awning. "Looks like we're stuck here together," she said, voice soft, carrying a warmth that seemed amplified by the rain. I laughed nervously, setting my groceries aside, and sat beside her, noting how close our shoulders brushed. The contact was innocent, unplanned, yet it sent a subtle thrill through me, making the ordinary moment feel charged with possibility. We talked as the rain tapped rhythmically overhead, our conversation meandering from light anecdotes to deeper, more personal confessions. She spoke of the rare solitude she treasured on evenings like this, and I found myself sharing small, private pieces of my own life, things I rarely voiced to anyone. The intimacy wasn't forced, it grew naturally, nourished by the soft hum of rain, the warmth of proximity, and the gentle cadence of her voice. At one point, her hand accidentally brushed mine as she shifted to grab her coffee cup. The touch was fleeting, almost imperceptible, yet it left an echo, a warmth that lingered long after our fingers separated. She glanced at me, eyes searching, and I realized we were both aware of the tension between us, the quiet pull of attraction carefully contained. The world outside the awning, the pouring rain, the empty street, felt distant, irrelevant, as if this small cocoon of shared space existed solely for us. She laughed softly at something I said, and I noticed the way her eyes crinkled, the subtle tilt of her head, the warmth of her shoulder brushing mine as we shifted on the bench. Every gesture, every glance, every small movement became a language of unspoken desire, emotional closeness, and trust. By the time the rain eased, the moment had passed, yet its impact lingered. As we stood to leave, our hands brushed once more, this time lingering slightly, an unspoken promise suspended in the space between us. I felt the gravity of what had transpired, a deepening connection, a quiet intimacy, and a slow-burn attraction that could no longer be ignored. Even after parting ways, I replayed the encounter over and over, savoring the way simple proximity, shared vulnerability, and fleeting touches had created a bridge between us, a bridge neither of us was ready to fully cross, yet one that had irrevocably changed the rhythm of our relationship. The weeks following that rainy evening carried a gentle, almost imperceptible shift in our relationship. The playful tension, the stolen glances, and the accidental brushes of hands had matured into something steadier, a quiet, unspoken understanding that we were tethered to each other in ways words could scarcely capture. Yet we moved with care, honoring boundaries, aware of her life and the delicate rhythm of propriety that governed our interactions. One late afternoon, I found her sitting on the steps outside her apartment, a soft breeze ruffling the edges of her scarf. I approached slowly, feeling the familiar pull of anticipation, my heart aware of every small gesture she made, the way she tilted her chin toward the sun, the faint curve of her lips as she noticed me. She looked up, eyes meeting mine, and I sensed that same magnetic tension, now tempered by comfort and trust. "Hi," I said softly, trying to sound casual though my chest was tight with emotion. "Hi," she replied, her smile warm, calm, and inviting, the kind of smile that acknowledged our shared history without needing to define it. We talked, as we always did, but this time there was a subtle difference. We lingered longer in pauses, allowed our words to trail off into silence that was comfortable rather than empty. Our hands brushed lightly as I passed her a small notebook I had found, a shared moment of connection that felt intimate yet wholly appropriate. There was a depth in her gaze, a recognition of the bond we had nurtured over weeks of quiet tension and delicate closeness. As the sun began to dip, casting golden hues across the building, she shifted slightly and placed her hand on my arm, a gentle, deliberate touch that carried reassurance, affection, and a promise of continued connection. It wasn't a confession, nor was it an escalation. It was acknowledgement. We had built something rare, a bridge of trust and emotional intimacy that neither time nor circumstance could erase. We walked together for a few steps before parting, and when she turned to wave, her eyes held a warmth that lingered far longer than the gesture. I watched her until she disappeared from view, the memory of her hand brushing mine, her laugh, her thoughtful pauses, and the quiet gravity of her presence imprinting itself in my mind. For the first time, I understood that love didn't always need dramatic declarations or physical abandon to be profound. Sometimes, it was in the quiet moments, the fleeting touches, the shared silences, and the unspoken understanding that two hearts had found a rhythm together. As I returned to my apartment, I carried a sense of peace and anticipation. The slow burn had reached its fulfillment, not through urgency or reckless passion, but through patience, care, and deep, resonant connection. And in that, there was a rare, enduring happiness that felt infinitely more powerful than fleeting romance. If you enjoyed this story of slow burn tension, forbidden attraction, and heartfelt connection, don't forget to hit like and subscribe for more age gap romance tales. Share your thoughts in the comments. Have you ever felt a connection that was impossible to ignore? Stay tuned for our next story of love, longing, and quiet passion.